Tom Petty was a rock legend, but for all his success, fame, and popularity, he had his ups and downs, both personally and professionally, before his final performance in 2017. Just before Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers hit the road in 2017 for a 40th anniversary tour, Petty was diagnosed with a fractured hip. It made standing, walking, and playing guitar on stage every night for months an excruciating ordeal for Petty. But according to a statement from his family, despite this painful injury, he insisted on keeping his commitment to his fans. Petty went out and performed 53 concerts, after which on October 1, 2017, doctors told him his fractured hip had become a broken hip. His wife Dana told Billboard, "He was like, I just got home. I want some time. I don't want to go to hip replacement surgery. I want to be home with my wife and dog." Petty had been using powerful prescription pain medications, including fentanyl, to cope with the pain while on the road. Tragically, later that same day, Petty accidentally overdosed and died the following evening. The first time Tom Petty spoke about his heroin addiction was for his unauthorized biography by Warren Zanes. According to Zanes, Petty turned to heroin at the age of 50. Zanes explained to the Washington Post, "That happens when the pain becomes too much." Zanes shared that Petty's addiction began when he was dealing with divorce, with living alone, and with the realization that he couldn't do anything to make sure his kids had the life he wanted for them, saying, "It was a classic situation of midlife pinning a person down to the mat." He added Petty had become overwhelmed and didn't know what else to do, but he'd stayed quiet about his addiction because he didn't want anyone to think of it as a viable option just because he'd done it. Zanes reassured him that his was a cautionary tale, but of course he had no idea how true that statement would become. Petty and George Harrison were way more than just colleagues. They were close friends. Zanes said they were the kind of friends only they could understand, telling the Washington Post, "No matter how corny it might sound, they were kind of falling in love with each other." At their level of success, true friendship isn't just hard to find, it's almost non-existent. When Petty and Harrison connected, Zanes said it was the happiest he'd ever seen him. Petty had been just 13 when he saw the Beatles on The Ed Sullivan Show, but when they finally met, he said their friendship was instant. Speaking to NPR, Petty called Harrison an older brother who I could go to with my troubles and questions. He credited Harrison with giving him a sense of spirituality, but he didn't open up about specific memories, only saying that he had thousands and thousands of them. In 2011, Tom Petty took part in a Q&A on his own SiriusXM show Tom Petty's Buried Treasure. Host Meg Griffin asked him listener-submitted questions, and when she asked about his influences, he had some seriously eclectic answers. There was AM radio, of course, and his first record purchase was the Marvelettes' 1962 album Playboy, which he bought with cash he'd scraped together from turning in Coke bottles.
I played these records to the point my parents began to worry that something was wrong with me.
One of his early jobs was as a gravedigger, remarking, "You didn't have to look too sharp." He addressed another rumor in the podcast, that he'd planted the University of Florida's Tom Petty tree. Whatever else sparked the creativity of a young Petty, it wasn't the University of Florida. The tree wasn't his doing at all. When the Chicago Tribune talked to King of the Hill creator Mike Judge in 2009, he said one of his favorite parts of the show's run was the fact that he got Tom Petty to voice a character originally described as Tom Petty without the success. Judge admitted they offered the role of Lucky to Petty on a whim, and were shocked when he was actually up for doing it. Judge recalled, "He just killed at the table read."
You're a self-made man?
Yep, slipped on pee-pee at the Costco. Got me a $53,000 settlement.
Petty must have liked the gig because he ended up as a series regular for 5 years, an impressive commitment. Petty told Men's Journal, "I've had a pipeline of marijuana since 1967. While he scoffed at the idea of needing a prescription, he did talk freely about some of his experiences with what he called a musical drug. Petty was a longtime history buff, and whenever he was in Washington, D.C., he'd head to the Jefferson Memorial late at night, get stoned, and simply sit. But when it came to this musical drug, at least, Petty knew his limits. He'd kept the first really nice car he was ever able to buy, a 1979 Mercedes 450 SL, but he didn't drive it. Petty admitted he was too spaced out to drive anymore. The last time he was behind a wheel of a car, he'd fully believed a pack of UFOs was descending on Malibu, only to spin off the road and crash into a pack of paparazzi. The silver balls were actually there, but they were balloons Adam Sandler had launched to keep drones and the like away from his wedding. Later that same night, Petty backed into another car and decided he was done driving. Tom Petty refused to accept any form of corporate sponsorship, and not just when it came to touring. When Billboard asked him about it in 2005, he responded that he wanted to keep ticket prices down so everyone could afford to come to a concert, and he wouldn't allow his music to be used in advertising either, explaining, "It's not heroic. I didn't write my songs to be orange juice commercials." The move has earned him his share of critics over the years who told him he could be making more money, but Petty didn't think it mattered, insisting that the integrity of the music and the band was more important. He considered playing ball with corporations to be selling out, making music common and irrelevant. In 2014, NPR asked him how he was able to reconcile his own wealth with his views on how money corrupts. But to Petty, the difference was that he not only came from humble beginnings, but that he didn't go out of his way to step on people or hurt others to make a buck. Tom Petty released Hard Promises in 1981, but it wasn't easy. He was enormously popular at the time, which inspired his label to roll out what they called superstar pricing. That was MCA's catchy name for putting a higher price tag on albums they knew were going to sell well, and it meant raising Hard Promises from the standard $8.98 to $9.98. But Petty took a stand. He told the New York Times that MCA had been great when it came to selling and promoting, but he explained they couldn't see the reality of what it's like on the street. They couldn't see that raising the album's price wouldn't be fair.
It was just too much money to pay for a record, I thought.
Petty was determined to do right. He told MCA he would rather not release the album at all than raise the price. He refused to be the act that resulted in album prices going up, and even though he told Tom Snyder he knew it was going to happen eventually, he was happy when he managed to stave it off a little longer.
This was just very pleasing to me because it was one situation where the audience actually won an issue.
Listen to any of Petty's music, and it's clear his influences come from that sweet spot in music history where country and rock and roll were running side by side and changing how the world listened. Elvis was his inspiration, and he worked with greats like Roy Orbison and Johnny Cash. But when it came to new music, Petty wasn't shy about expressing his opinion.
I like it more when the groups actually play something.
Speaking with Rolling Stone in 2013, he said he couldn't think of any music he'd heard lately that impressed him. He said modern country was like bad rock with a fiddle, and he meant it. And he went on to add, "It does seem to be missing that magic element that it used to have. I don't really see a George Jones or a Buck Owens or anything that fresh coming up." It wasn't just country that irked him either. In 2006, Esquire quoted him as saying he never would have been successful if he'd had to start his career then, explaining, "Radio doesn't take a chance on anything anymore. They've streamlined the playlist to the lowest common denominator." Petty lamented the fact people would rather listen to the same thing over and over than try something new, and he believed that behavior to be a product of the time. With so much focus on school, kids didn't have an opportunity to be creative, and it made him sad. You can't get much more American than Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, but they were something of a US flop until they headed across the pond to impress English audiences with their sound. In 1976, the group released its debut album to poor sales. It wasn't until they went to England to open for Nils Lofgren that the album began to sell. After that, it was only a matter of weeks before they were a headline act, breaking first into the British, then the American charts. But that first tour wasn't easy. According to Rolling Stone, the Heartbreakers' increasing popularity led to some serious tension between Lofgren and the American upstarts. Heartbreakers guitarist Mike Campbell went on record as saying the more of a reaction they got from British audiences, the less room on stage they got. As for Petty, he just called Lofgren and his band a string of expletives.
Sometimes the song can come so fast that you're suspicious of where it came from.
Petty used the word magic to describe every part of the musical experience. Speaking with MTV about the magical process of songwriting, he said, "It's kind of like an orgasm." And he once told The Telegraph, "Music is probably the only real magic I've encountered in my life. There's not some trick involved with it. It's pure and it's real. And it moves and it heals and it communicates and does all these incredible things. It's been so good to me that I want to be good to it. Head to a magic show and you'll see some tricks. Head to a concert and you'll feel that same mysterious force, but minus the deception." According to Petty, that's real magic. He'd seen the effects of it too, and told NPR that if he thought about the connection music made between him and those who listened to it, he felt it was equal parts thrilling and terrifying. He marveled, "It's kind of like, did I do that?" Petty even claimed he'd heard of 2 people who'd come out of comas to his songs. If true, that would indeed be real magic. The music industry is built on trades, contracts, and more than occasional shady dealings, and in 1979, Tom Petty had enough. The group had originally signed with Shelter, but when Shelter was bought by MCA, Petty made it clear he didn't appreciate being part of the package.
I felt like they just sold us like we were groceries or, frozen pork or something.
Petty was unhappy with the terms of his contract. To be fair, they weren't great. The band had already had 2 major albums sell extraordinarily well, but they hadn't seen much in the way of financial gain. That's mostly because artists didn't get royalties until they paid studios back for everything from their initial advances to marketing expenses, studio time, and tour expenses. Sounds sus? He thought so. The album looming on the horizon was Damn the Torpedoes, and it's the one that everyone knows. Petty sat on it, refusing to release it under the contract he was under, and took on all the recording and production costs himself. This put him a whopping $500,000 in debt, and he declared bankruptcy. It was all intentional as a way to gain leverage in courts when it came time to demand release from an unfair contract.
And if you're bankrupt, all contracts are void. So if you proved that in court, you could walk.
It worked. MCA relented and re-signed the group, and Damn the Torpedoes was a major success. Anyone familiar with the creative process knows there are things that come easy and things that come hard. Southern Accents was the latter, and amid the album's birthing pains was some serious insanity. Drummer Stan Lynch even said, "Tom was dancing with the devil at that point. I imagined he was going to go. Something was going to happen real bad." None of this was helped by Petty's drug use, and his career almost came to an end one day when, frustrated by the whole mess, Petty stormed out of the studio, punched a wall, and shattered his hand.
I didn't just break the hand, I pulverized it. I'd powdered it.
Petty later said, "I'd been working on the album for over a year and I thought I was finally about done. But I sat down and listened to one of the songs and I knew it still wasn't right." Petty insisted it wasn't fury that caused the accident. His doctor told him he may have lost his ability to play guitar, but when he was interviewed in 1985, the only remaining evidence was a scar. In 2012, Petty said the old injury was acting up again, but he chalked it up to being 61.
I was really lucky because I knew what I wanted to do very early in life.
Even the best have to start somewhere, and Petty started at a local music store in his hometown of Gainesville, Florida. Also spending time in the same music store was Don Felder, who'd go on to play with the Eagles. In an interview with Gibson, Felder said he'd been working at the store to build up enough credit to buy equipment. Part of the gig was giving lessons, and he recalled, "One day, this kind of scrawny, scraggly, blonde-haired kid came in and wanted guitar lessons. Felder first became his teacher, and they ultimately became friends. They hung out and played together, and those early lessons stuck with the young Petty." On May 17, 1987, an arsonist destroyed much of Petty's Encino, California home. He, his wife, and their 5-year-old daughter barely escaped. In conversations with Tom Petty, he told author Paul Zollo, they found the evidence where someone had cut a hole in the back fence on a hill and had been watching the house.
I mean, I don't know if you've ever had somebody try to kill you, but it's a really weird feeling.
The house was almost completely destroyed, except for the basement studio, which somehow remained untouched. While Petty admitted to being traumatized for a long time after, the experience inspired the hit "I Won't Back Down" from his 1989 album Full Moon Fever. It's a song about defiance and a refusal to give in to oppressive forces. Petty told NPR, "Maybe the fire had something to do with the song, because I felt really elated that they didn't get me. The thought that was going through my head, whoa, you didn't get me."
Wop, bop, loom, bop, lop, bam, boom.
Yeah.
Didn't nobody know what it meant, and I didn't either.
Yeah.
Little Richard helped create the idea and sound of rock and roll in the 1950s, but he left secular entertainment in 1957 to pursue a calling to be a Christian minister. Richard would eventually stage a comeback, but he struggled to balance rock music with his religious beliefs and his LGBT identity.
I'm not gay now, but I was gay all my life. I believe I was one of the first gay people to come out.
But there was a way for him to combine music, spirituality, and romantic love. Little Richard used his status as a minister to legally marry rock stars and their spouses. He performed the wedding ceremony for Stephen Van Zandt, Cyndi Lauper, and Petty. In the summer of 2001, Petty married his second wife, Dana York, at their Malibu, California home, and Little Richard came prepared. Petty told the Chicago Tribune, "He did yell 'shut up' at one point. He was really nervous, but so was I. He gave a long talk about love and its characteristics and what it shouldn't do. He was pretty inspirational." In 1997, Kevin Costner directed and starred in The Postman. He played the title character, a man who roams the post-apocalyptic ruins of America to deliver old letters because it brings hope and happiness to the hopeless and unhappy. The Postman included a cameo by Petty, who at the time hadn't done much acting outside his music videos. Petty played the leader of a survivor community.
"I know you. You're famous."
I was once, sort of.
That allusion to celebrity suggests that Petty was essentially playing himself. Budgeted at $80 million and grossing just $17 million, The Postman was a massive box office bomb and earned savage critical reviews. But Petty was one of the few people who actually appreciated the film. He told Rolling Stone, "It was at a time when I really needed to do something. I was, lost. The band had stopped touring. I lived alone. I needed to do something with my time, and this sounded perfect. I'm grateful to Kevin." The general public is familiar with many of Petty's songs, but Love Is a Long Road isn't among them. A track on Petty's first solo album, 1989's Full Moon Fever, the song didn't garner much pop radio airplay. It was featured on mainstream rock stations, but there was no music video to boost the song's popularity on MTV and VH1. All things considered, it's a deep cut and obscure track, and yet it's one of Petty's most popular posthumous songs, and it had a resurgence in the 2020s. That's because in December 2023, Rockstar Games used the tune in the first official trailer for the long-awaited Grand Theft Auto 6. Within 2 days, more than 100 million people watched the clip on YouTube, and a large portion of those viewers tracked down Love Is a Long Road on music streaming services. According to Spotify, weekly listens for the song jumped by a whopping 36,979%.
Everyone has moments from their childhood that define them, and for Petty, his adult outlook was shaped by an abusive childhood. According to a 2013 interview with Men's Journal, Petty's grandfather, a logger from Georgia, married a Cherokee woman, and, family legend has it, slew a man with an axe who had a problem with the Union. His father, Earl, was raised in Florida after the family fled, and Petty said his dad was an angry drunk. Earl regularly beat Tom, his siblings, and his beloved mother, who introduced him to music, which quickly became what he called his safe place. But like the booze, the music also fueled his old man's anger. Petty suspected Earl was so mean to him because of his interest in music and the arts, which Earl found effeminate. Petty told Men's Journal in that same interview that his mother was everything to him growing up, crediting her with keeping, quote, an element of civilization in the house. Because of her, his first musical influences were crooners like Nat King Cole and the soundtrack to musicals like West Side Story. The first record Petty bought with his own money, scraped together from turning in Coke bottles, was the Marvelettes' Playboy from 1962. Once the family got a television, Petty says he realized there was a great big world out there beyond his troubled life in Florida, and he longed to escape to Los Angeles, or as he called it, Television City, his way out. Around that same time, when Petty was 11, he met Elvis Presley while the King was filming Follow That Dream in Ocala, and that sealed the deal. He later told Billboard, "It wasn't like meeting Jesus, but it was close." He went home, asked his mother to buy him a guitar from Sears, and started spending his free time in a local music shop. By 14, he had formed his first band, the Sundowners, and never looked back. They say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, but without proper attribution, it can also get you sued in the music industry. In the last few decades of Petty's life, there were 3 instances of artists allegedly plagiarizing his riffs, but he never seemed bitter about any of it. And only one case ended with Petty getting a songwriting credit. In 2006, after the Red Hot Chili Peppers were accused of lifting Mary Jane's Last Dance in Danny, California, Petty told Rolling Stone, "I think there are enough frivolous lawsuits in this country without people fighting over pop songs." In that same interview, Petty mentioned how the Strokes admitted to lifting parts of his American Girl for their song Last Night and said it made him laugh out loud. His laid-back attitude showed up again in 2015 when he ended up with a writing credit on Sam Smith's Stay With Me, which sounds uncannily similar to Petty's I Won't Back Down. Smith said he wasn't even familiar with Petty's song, but the two parties settled the issue amicably. Petty later told Rolling Stone there were no hard feelings and it was, quote, a musical accident. No more, no less. The year of Petty's death, Confederate statues and symbols re-emerged as a hot topic in the U.S., with many states choosing to remove iconography deemed sympathetic to the Confederacy. As it turns out, back in 1985, Petty used the Confederate flag as marketing during his Southern Accents tour, but later deeply regretted it.
You grow up in the South like that, you really never beat it out of you, you know.
After South Carolina took down the Confederate flag from outside its state house in 2015, Petty wrote an essay for Rolling Stone apologizing for his own use of it. He wrote that he used the flag to help illustrate a character in his song Rebels, but things got out of hand, and he had to ask fans to stop bringing the flags to his shows. He told the magazine, quote, "I was pretty ignorant of what it actually meant. It's like how a swastika looks to a Jewish person. It was dumb, and it shouldn't have happened." Corporate sponsorships are the norm in rock and roll, but Petty stubbornly refused to accept them for any of his tours throughout his long career. When Billboard asked him about it in 2005, he said it was about keeping the Heartbreakers independent and trustworthy to fans, telling the magazine, "We started it from nothing and we own it, and I want people to trust it. It's not for sale." By all accounts, Petty was in good spirits and health when he and the Heartbreakers kicked off their 40th anniversary tour in April 2017. But he hinted it might be his last, telling Rolling Stone in December 2016 that he no longer wanted to spend his life on the road. In hindsight, the entire interview is eerie and heartbreaking. After a 3-year lull from touring, the longest the band had been off the road in 25 years, Petty told the magazine that he wanted to spend more time with his granddaughter, among other priorities, but he hadn't made up his mind about future touring. "I'd be lying if I didn't say I was thinking this might be the last big one. We're very aware that time is finite. At the end of the year, we'll say, what do you feel like doing? Then we'll figure out where to go next." In a 2014 interview with CBC News, Petty said he was born to make music.
I feel like for some reason I was born with some kind of conduit to this energy force or whatever it is.